Hallelujah. Sing it. Don't you rise, shine, for your light is come.
You just saw a service with River of Life Ministries. My husband and I started that church back in January 5 to be specific, 1980. And it's a lovely church home if you're looking for one. Check it out. We'd love to have you. I want to move right into my topic because I did part one. Hopefully you see that either in last week on TV or soon on YouTube. That program will be on there. And I want you to see it not only for yourself, but if you know anybody who could benefit by what the topic is. The topic is Home Ministry Fellowship. This is the church, 501c, started in California by Bobby and Charles Stillwell in 1966. And they, specifically Pastor Charles Stillwell, called us when we had told them we wanted to start a church in our living room. He called us because he felt the Lord told him to let us be a part of Home Ministry Fellowship, which meant we had an immediate 501c, which meant people could give us donations. They were tax deductible, plus we didn't have to pay taxes on them. That's a blessing. For as long as in the United States, nonprofit organizations like churches can have that benefit, I want to keep doing it. I've had friends that dropped out of that because they were afraid of government interference. My stand is when they interfere, I will drop out of that status, and hopefully people will still give to the work even if they can't get a break on their taxes for it, and will have to bite the bullet and pay taxes on the offerings. But if that day comes, I'm sure God will take care of us. Meanwhile, we're taking advantage of what Pastor Stillwell gave us way back in 1980. He also ordained both Robert and I, which we did not think for 1 second. When God told us to start a church, it never occurred to us, oh, we need to be ordained. We need to get a corporation. We were so excited about fulfilling God's vision for what He told us to do as a church. If you read Home Ministry, if you watch Home Ministry Fellowship Part 1, you'll hear that part, that God gave us Ephesians 4 and what that meant as a model for doing church. But we were so excited about walking that out that we never even thought about these other conveniences and blessings. And we've done many weddings and sadly funerals as well, and hospital visits that got us in on off hours. We were even chaplains for a while in a penitentiary before the Dunes in Saugatuck closed its door as a prison. But before that, we were able to be a part of the chaplain board, and for many years we'd go there and have services from time to time, all because Pastor Stillwell felt to call us and say, I think it would be helpful if you could be a part of a nonprofit and be ordained. It's helpful to have these things. Well, now I, as the president of Home Ministry Fellowship, and my husband as vice president, and in one accord with me, have begun to reach out more with the message of what we have to offer, which would be the same thing Pastor Stillwell gave to us, namely being a part of a 501c already in place and being eligible for ordination. And I can tack on to that offer if you're sincere, but you don't have all the training you need, but you have a lot of experience, but you haven't been through the Bible. I'd be glad to offer going through the Bible with you and certifying that you have done this. There's some other exercises too that are involved with the word ministry training that I offer. It's not easy. It's a challenge, and a lot of people, they want, but they realize once they have to go through it, it's not that simple to go through the Word on a regular basis. And there's a lot involved in the training, but I could conceivably do it through internet if you agree to be diligent. We can talk about all these things. I hope they again put my email on the screen. There it is right now. And you can write me and talk about these things. The corporation is still legally based in California. And we have a resident agent there, and we keep it current. It's been current since 1966. That's why I just took a trip to California to offer to some friends what I'm talking about right now, because it's already a church in California. So anybody there already ministering, if they have weekly meetings, they know and love the Lord. We can talk later what all this entails, but I wanted to offer it to some devout Christian friends in California, not only if they were people that could do this, but also if they know of some others. But actually, technically, we're in Michigan and took advantage of it. You could be in Indiana, Illinois. In fact, we had a church for quite a while in Defiance, Ohio, and it was part of the same corporation, even though we call it River of Life, Defiance, Ohio. You could call your church whatever name God gives you. It still would be a subsidiary of Home Ministry Fellowship. You know, what I'm talking about right now would only resonate with people that God's speaking to their hearts. Because what I'm talking about, it's only a divine connection that would have you say, she is talking to me, or she's talking about something my granddaughter or grandson would want to do, or daughter or son, or whoever you know that just has a burden with a church vision. Now I'm going to tell you something. When I offered this to one of my friends in California who is about my age and is a seasoned evangelist of God with many gifts of the Spirit, her first thought was, I'm not ready to start a formal church. And so the first thing I want to say to you is, our world, our culture, but most all cultures, have some sort of notion of what church has to look like to call themselves a church. And the only thing you have to look like is what the New Testament would call a church. A lot of time, in fact, when we started in our house, and we were there a good 3 years, and some services for 4, we rented a building, I think our 4th year, but we also still had some things going on in our home. But for the first 3 years, it was strictly our home, from 80 to 83-ish. And there were parents that could not conceive of our church being a church simply because we met in our living room. Or because maybe their child told them, or young person told them, oh, we got 17 people in our church, which we thought was something right around 1982, because we started out with my husband, myself, and my son. That was it. My son was like 8. So there you go. And what was so nice is when we started, a week before we started the church, we called together our friends that were either mature or in leadership already somewhere, just to tell them our vision and get them to pray for us, and if they knew anybody that they thought could harmonize with our vision, tell them about it. Now, not one of them there did we think, oh, maybe they'll come to our church. Not one person, not one in that first meeting. I guess there were a dozen people there. There was one lady there named Vi Vanderlinde, and if you're from Grand Rapids, you know her as a devout woman of God, Spirit-filled, got into a lot of deliverance she was willing to do for many people. It's a devout woman of God. And when we were talking about one piece of advice she gave us before we knew one person, other than Robert and E.G. and I, who were going to come to the church, she said, call yourself the pastors immediately. Well, that feels really funny when you're calling yourself pastors and your first meeting, for all you know, it's going to be Robert, E.G., and I. But we never did have a meeting where it was just Robert and E.G. and I. Don't even ask me where the people came from, especially in the first weeks and months. I could tell you who was there, but why they were there and who told them or how they found out, it was just God. Now, I can tell you other things about how it evolved, but it has evolved. But we're still a home church, but we happen to have a building. And there's quite a few more people than Robert. Well, actually, E.G.'s in Miami, so there's a lot more people than Robert and I now. But I just want to encourage you that as I talk about anybody starting a church, I'll encourage you with this verse, Matthew 18:19. Well, let me just go to verse 20. Matthew 18, verse 20. For where there are 2 or 3 assembled in my name, there I am in the midst of them. So if it had been just Robert and I and E.G. the first month, the Lord would have been there. Actually, I figure when it's just me and Jesus, He's there. There's 2 of us right there. The Lord is not into numbers. He's not into numbers. Your church is no better than the church up the street just because you have 3,000 people and they have 30. Only God knows what the heart is. Actually, I feel to share right now what the Lord showed me. That was a comfort to me several years ago now because it was really a blessing to me. He showed me that if He'd just hand me a seed and tell me to plant it without even telling me what that seed is. And maybe He's doing the same thing at the same time to 10 other people. But when we plant the seed given to us by God, our job is to make sure the soil is free of everything that's going to choke it. Plant it in good soil, like I'm saying, deeply. Water it. Help it as it struggles to be fruitful. And then it's not until it starts to grow that we even find out, what did I just plant? And I might have been given a, who knows, a cactus that has that fruit in the desert in Mexico. They call it tuna, and it's good. Most of us in the United States don't know about this fruit in the cactus. Mine might produce a cactus with juicy fruit for a weary traveler. Yours might be a humongous tree, huge tree, an oak tree that just shades all kinds of creatures and houses all kinds of creatures. Somebody else, it might be an apple tree, and on and on. You didn't know it when you got the seed, unless you're really well versed in seeds, what that seed would produce. But you find out as you're faithful. And all God's looking at is, be faithful to the vision I gave you. Now, I'm not saying my husband and I and the other leaders now have been perfect in our faithfulness, but I will say that God's been faithful, and we have walked as faithfully as we could or know how to, and repented at moments where we didn't come forth 100% in the fruit of God's Spirit. And God has given us a work in which we're happy. We would love to have more people come, but where what is going on is a blessing to those that I know of that are there, and some have been there for decades. God's not into numbers. You could have a church of 10,000 people without one person pressing in deeply into the Lord. Or maybe everybody there is. You can't judge that from the outside, but you sure can't tell sheerly by the arms of their ministry in terms of community service or the size of their building. Only God knows. So I want to tell you in the beginning, if you're meeting every week and you've got 12 people meeting with you, it could already be a church because you're the leader and the pastor, but you just haven't dared to call it that. I won't even talk to you about the times in the beginning where I felt funny because maybe in a glow speaker would say, okay, all the pastors come up and help me pray with the people that have lined up for prayer. I remember when Pastor Klingenberg did that, Robert Klingenberg, First Assembly, and I'd just been ordained. And I'm like, oh, wow, these people don't even know I'm a pastor. And I felt like every eye was on me when I decided to be true what God had done and pray for people. And I felt just little and insignificant and pitiful. But everybody received me and nobody said anything, so I broke through that moment of self-consciousness is what that was. And you might have to break through something when you declare what you are and what you have. Then I want to tell you, in the New Covenant, people had churches in their homes. They also often, every Sabbath, went to the synagogue and shared with people there. That's true, but they had churches in their home, too, that were fully churches. Paul wrote that he was writing greetings to Priscilla and Aquila in Romans 16, and in verse 5 he says, greetings to the church that meets at their house. It says that. Then in Colossians 4:15, salute the brethren which are in Laodicea and Nymphas, and the church which is in his house. Philemon 1, he salutes, and Timothy, Philemon, and a couple other people called Apphia and Archippus, our fellow soldier, and to the church in thy house. And he says he prays for them all times, and he mentions the other saints. And I imagine, this is what I imagine in the New Covenant days, when the New Covenant first came forth, and in Paul's time, there were probably a lot of house churches in a given city, but they related to one another, probably saw each other every week at the synagogue. And I believe when Paul sent his letters, they circulated them to people in their town. Now, because of our cultural background, when we think, hello Ephesians, we imagine some huge structure where all the Ephesians are and the letters being read to the whole group. It's just not in our frame of reference to think of all these house churches. Actually, I think it's wonderful. Now, our church is probably just under 100 if everybody and their kids would show up. But, like I said, we still have the same atmosphere of a house, church, and a building. And you know what? I'll add to this series. If you're someone that sounds like us, but we've never met, I'd love for us to meet, because it would really be cool. Like, say, once every few months, we all met together and encouraged each other, even though none of us feel that our DNA, spiritual, is to be one huge mega church. That's not our goal. We're not looking to put our name on the map unless God does it. Like Solomon asked for wisdom, and God turned around and gave him gold and glory. Well, that's great, but that's not our immediate goal. And if we're all close together on the way to that, that's cool, because then we can share it all with each other, because now we're friends. And we can figure out what great things we can do for the kingdom of God, because God has blessed one or all of us, just to see what happens. I will say, for the other ministers in Grand Rapids, it didn't take long for Full Gospel ones to recognize us and invite them, like Pastor Jim Bugg, invite us to be a part of ministers' groups. And I appreciated that recognition, in spite of the fact we were not as all of them were already. I appreciated that, and I want to be that to other churches. I also want to say that churches in the New Covenant, and there's our base for doing church, New Covenant, they had leaders, and Paul would tell people to ordain elders wherever they went and pray with them. Now, I think sometime Paul remained the apostle, still training some of these people, and then he would tell them, this is what I think you should, like Corinth. They were messing up. They were receiving sin in a wrong way, a man fooling around with his stepmom. Paul gave an order to that church as to how they should deal with that. So there was some authority going on, and maybe the elders were learning how to be elders. Maybe they would have known to do that if they were more mature. But he speaks to Titus, Paul does, in Titus 1, and he said, I left you in Crete, so you should set in order the things that are wanting, and ordain elders in every city as I've appointed thee. So I know there's some house churches, I've read about them, I don't know them personally, that just have had it with pastors and leadership. So in their church they say, we'll just let the Holy Ghost lead, whatever happens, happens. You know what? I know that I know, because I know people, that somebody in that group within the weeks to follow is going to emerge as the leader, whether they're called that or not, just by virtue of a strong personality and respect for others. And maybe it's not the one that should be the leader. Maybe there needs to be more prayer into finding out who's called to be. Personally, I would not, unless Robert and I became the pastors of that church and we put the leader in training, while they're leading a weekly group, that could happen. I could conceive of that. But I cannot conceive of a church being started without somebody ready to be one of the fivefold ministry. And I believe any one of the fivefold ministry could lead a church, even though technically it would be nice to have a pastor/teacher. I think an apostle, a prophet, an evangelist, a pastor, teacher, that all of these people are capable of starting and leading a church. But ideally, I think there should be a pastor with the people's heart, because if somebody's an evangelist, eventually they're going to get an apostle. They're going to get itching to start more churches or go minister for salvation to more people. And to have a pastor with a heart for the people in that place, or people they've trained to take their place when they're out doing apostle things, whatever. I think it's important to have leadership. Let me just put it like that. So just because you have a group, I think there's some ingredients you have to have in order to even think about going from a nice group, breakaway bunch of people, to now this is going to become a church that we're going to offer. Now, having said that, I don't believe there's an issue. Say somebody, like I know somebody that has a heart for people that are believers, but they're struggling with the sin of homosexuality. Say you really have a heart for those people, and you start a church, and half of them are those people. You got 7 of them and 5 people that are hetero and believers that just want to grow up into Christ. I don't have a problem if a church starts out with a specialty. I don't really have a problem with that. Or I don't have a problem if you start a church, the pastor is a woman, and again, you got 7 women and 4 guys in it. I don't have a problem. I don't look at a church after the flesh. I don't have a problem if you speak Spanish and I don't, and we have to relate through an interpreter, but you would like to use what I'm offering. I don't have a problem if you're Chinese, Vietnamese, just immigrated with your whole congregation from Cambodia, and you need what I'm talking about, a 501c covering and ordination to operate in the United States. I actually need to check the legality. Maybe we still need to stay on paper as the pastors, as you're the elders, while you become the process of becoming a citizen. I'm not sure about the legality of that. All I know is I want to be somebody, I know my husband does as well, who would love to make it easy for brothers and sisters who are called to start a church from scratch. We are not at or from 12 people that moved here from wherever, or you know a lot of out-of-church people that you've been discipling and it's been in your living room and they feel safe there, but you're beginning to see the next step would be to literally incorporate so that you can literally call yourself a church, and these people that are in transition from being out of church altogether into beginning to trust leadership and their brothers and sisters again, that you can take the next step into, you know what, we've been acting like a church for a long time again, let's call it what it is. I have a heart to want to see people not think, oh, the church, it has to be, we have to have an official pulpit and praise team and brick building, and who's going to serve communion? Honey, your child, a believer, could serve communion. There's no new covenant directive that says you can't do that yourself in your home with your kids taking turns serving you and you doing it yourself. Let's don't add rules to the new covenant concerning who can have what in their home, or if you want to rent a hotel room. Let's don't add to it. But like I said in the last program, and maybe I said it already, we're not cheap. We do have standards. We do have standards of Bible knowledge, of, say, like we were at First Assembly, as I've said before, as the college and career class ministers. If you happen to wonder, is that her? It was 79 to 80. So it was a year from 78 to 79 December. But that's when we felt to stop going there. And we loved it there. We loved Pastor Benson. We could have stayed there our whole life. But God called us to start a church. So there's going to be people that say, what? Well, if God sincerely called, if you sincerely heard the voice of God, you're not going to have me saying, what? I might kick the tires some, but I'm not going to see it as odd because it happened to us. If you say to me, you know what, God's called me to minister. We had a lady that was ministering on South Division. She started out with an evangelistic ministry. Then she'd start to teach these people, and then she felt called to be a pastor. Then she rented a building, and that church went several years, and we were the apostles of that church during that time to help her with it. And I'm fine, whatever kind of room or building or hotel room, whatever it is you feel to meet in, or your living room. You might have to check with wherever you're living to make sure the space between the houses is big enough that you can actually have meetings in your home, because if you can't, then you might have to rent a hotel room. But you'd be surprised how, matter of fact, you could start out in a residence inn. That living room's big enough to meet in, or extended stay. Not quite as big. Residence Inn might be better. But there's so many places you can meet. I will say one thing. I personally have a hard time meeting in somebody else's home when I am the leader, because we all have a natural tendency to defer to the owner of a place. So if you rent somewhere, you're in charge. Don't be afraid to say you're in charge when you know you're the one called to do it. Please, because the first person that's strong enough will start telling you how to do it if you don't have the courage to take up leadership when God called you to do it. I told you, too, that they still went to the temple during that time. Acts 5:42 will show you that. They were daily in the temple and in every house. Paul himself hired a house, rented a house, Acts 28, verse 30. For 2 years, he preached in his own rented house. So, in effect, Paul had a house church during those 2 years, and also in effect he continued to call himself a father of all the churches that he had something to do with evangelizing and starting. He had a lot of roles in the early church. So just know that River of Life is a part of Home Ministry Fellowship, and as such we still have the ability to give the gift we were given. Bring somebody else in on our 501c and ordain and train. Pray about it. If that's you, contact me, please.